So, so a snapshot of me. I'm Amber. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I graduated from UNC in 2012. After that, I took 2 years off from school. I did the Luce Scholarship the first year. I lived in the Philippines. I worked with children who were incarcerated in the Philippines. The second year, I ran a nonprofit that I have. Then I went to law school at Yale. I graduated in 2017. After that, I clerked on the Ninth Circuit, which is like an apprenticeship with a judge. And since then, I've been a civil rights attorney, and right now I'm located in New York, hoping to come back to North Carolina in not too long. So that's me.
Thanks, Amber. Hi, my name's Corey. I guess if you had to put my summary in one line, it would be something like, from corporate naysayer to corporate do-gooder. When I was at Carolina, I was an international studies and French double major. And if people confused that with international business, I was personally offended. And it was like, no, it's not about making money, it's about helping people. The irony is that I have spent the last 13 plus years of my career in the corporate sector helping companies use their strengths for greater good. And I love it. I've totally found my niche there. So the last 5 years I've been at Sephora. I lead social impact, sustainability, and inclusion and diversity there. Before that, I was at Google for 8 years, 3 years in engineering, and then 5 years at google.org. Before that, I was with the Clinton Foundation, working in East Africa with their HIV/AIDS program in Rwanda. And before that, I was in grad school. I went to Princeton and did a Master's of Public Affairs and International Development. And then the year before that, we're almost done, I worked here at the university. I after graduation, stayed here in Chapel Hill for a year and worked for what is now the FedEx Global Center with a program that sought to bring the world to North Carolina schools. So that's a little bit about me.
Hey folks, how are you? Good. Very interesting to see you all here today. My snapshot, I was thinking about 20 years ago, I was in this exact same room as you are, and full circle, within the last year, I have helped to found a company with someone I met on this very weekend. And it has been a long path between that day and this day. I think it probably often seems like people have a very narrow or straight road to how they get to where they get. But mine has been anything but, I can tell you that. I left school and spent years in the Hollywood film industry, writing screenplays, developing television shows. At some point in time decided it was time to move on. I went back to grad school. I helped to consult strategy, consulting work mostly for large companies, large and small. And then at some point in time I wanted to get into the startup scene. So I started with my first one that failed miserably, but it was a lot of fun. Got into the restaurant business, which was a little more fun, failed a little less. And now we're on to the next one, which was the one that I mentioned. And we actually spent the first 6 months working out of these offices. And so when Chuck says that the Morehead is really here to invest in you finding out who you are, he means that. And he's probably talking directly to me because I'm still finding out who I am.
You have your own mic for you alone. Hey everyone, so my name is Benroy July, class of '04. So thinking about my path, so it's kind of been interesting. So, you know, I graduated from Carolina and went on to law school. And then I started practicing law, and then at some point I decided that I was kind of bored with just practicing law alone, so I started going to the boxing gym to kind of get in shape, and then eventually started beating everybody in the boxing gym. And so I said, hey, I'll try some amateur fights, and then beat everybody there, and then said, okay, I'm gonna go pro. And so as I was practicing law, I actually also was a professional boxer for 7 years, and actually was pretty good. So I boxed for like 7 years, was like ranked internationally, and then now I'm like, it sounds a lot more impressive than it is. And then now I moved to Baltimore, Maryland, which many of you might have heard has a pretty bad rap And I'm really kind of doing the law. I'm still practicing law. I'm a partner at a law firm here in Baltimore. In Baltimore, but also kind of doing some real estate investment, really trying to help to develop the neighborhood and try to build on some other things in Baltimore to kind of give it back a good rap. So that's where I am now.
Great, and I have my own microphone. So I'm Charlene Wong. Benwer and I were classmates, so we met this weekend, just like you guys did 20 years ago. So I'm a pediatrician and a health policy researcher. I actually live in Chapel Hill now. My path coming out of Carolina, I was probably, I think, during college, had a pretty straight road that I thought was ahead of me. I was pre-med, did some shadowing, some research, things like that. Took a year off. I worked at Planned Parenthood and just got into the real world for a little bit, and I did all my medical school and all my clinical training. And really, I think, inspired by what was instilled, in all of us during the our Morehead-Cain experiences, was that I did become a physician, and I wanted to go a little bit further and really think about how do I become a change agent to improve our healthcare system, which, as probably most of you know, has lots of room for improvement. And so what I'm currently doing is I'm the executive director for a new model called the Integrated Care for Kids model. And it's actually in North Carolina. It is working in partnership between Duke and UNC. I happen to work at Duke, but we are a Tar Heel family. My husband works at Carolina. Our children only wear Carolina blue. And what we're doing is we're trying to, I was just telling Jeff, I sort of feel like we're in a startup right now. We're starting up a new little healthcare system for 100,000 Medicaid-insured children who live around Duke and UNC to try to do better by them and their families. So it's been really exciting. And I will just kick us off maybe into the Q&A. I was just telling Chuck and Megan a story that happened recently. It really is lifelong friends that you will form here. I was just on a ski trip just a few months ago in Utah, and there were 5 of us from our class who were there, and we all got together, and a lot of us have kids around the same age, and we were there, and we were actually reminiscing about some of the first impressions that we had of each other during this weekend, and it was hilarious because you form those first impressions very quickly, and then you get to really know people, and then now we're lifelong friends.
Start. Nobody else would. So, a couple of things. So obviously, the Outward Bound. The Outward Bound to me was probably one of the most life-changing events for me. So you guys don't know, but I remember at one point we had, so a bit of background. I'm originally from Jamaica and had moved from Jamaica to the Bronx, New York, and it was in the not nice part of the Bronx. And then I gotten a chance to go to school, but then, we go to this Outward Bound. It's my first time out in nature. And, so my Outward Bound, I did, hiking and then canoeing and then rock climbing. And at one point in the trip, they do this thing called a solo. And basically what they do, they take you and drop you somewhere by yourself. And they give you a bag of nuts and raisins, and you're this is a time for you to think. And I just remember having an emotional moment during that time, and it I became enlightened about what life meant for me. So then you take that, and then you go into. I came into law school thinking, I'd always, as an immigrant, my family would always say you're going to be a lawyer, and so I always kind of knew I was going to be a lawyer, but I didn't really know what that really meant. And the summer where I got to intern, I actually interned at the Motley Fool, which is started by a Morehead founder. A former Morehead Scholar. And it was about business and kind of understanding investments. And, going there and kind of understanding money and the way that it was able to utilize that to actually impact positive social things is kind of what those two things in combination kind of helped me to do what I'm doing now. So I'm a corporate attorney, but not in the evil, maniacal way that people think about corporate attorneys, right? I try to actually use my law practice to be able to kind of help some of the social issues that I see and thinking about different ways to utilize money to actually bring about benefits in the neighborhoods that I care about.
came to Chapel Hill, I got involved in a student organization that mentors incarcerated children in Durham, North Carolina every week. And that organization is still around, so if you have any interest in doing that, you can do it. And I remember my first summer for the Morehead, I was thinking, oh, I just want to, teach math in inner city Philadelphia or something. And my advisor said, Amber, you should really think about going abroad. And I had never considered what it would look like for me to work abroad or to do kind of social justice work abroad until she planted that seed in my mind. And so I ended up going to Ghana, and I started off teaching in Ghana, but because kind of the culture of the Morehead-Cain teaches you to reach beyond what you see, I ended up going to their equivalent of a social department in Ghana, and I got a role working in a prison for incarcerated girls in Ghana that summer. That was my first Morehead summer. And so then for my second Morehead summer, I said, hey, well, that was pretty cool. One of our scholars was from Scotland, and so I asked her, hey, do you have juvenile detention centers in Scotland? I would love to work in one. She said, sure, we can figure this out. So we sent my resume over to Scotland to the Young Boys Correctional Facility. It's their maximum security prison in Scotland for teenage boys. And that was my second summer. I was in Scotland working there. And it just kind of expanded from there. For the fellowship I did after college, I was working with children incarcerated in the Philippines, and now as a civil rights attorney, I work with individuals mainly based in Louisiana who are sentenced to life without parole as children. And so, the Morehead really kind of opened up my world to this issue, and gave me the courage to chase this issue down around the world, and gave me, just experiences I couldn't have imagined when I was sitting in this.
Yeah, and I'll add one more story to that. I didn't have a sort of enlightening moment like Venroy had, though our group, among our whole group, we decided that we were going to fast on our solos, which I don't know, may or may not have been a good idea, but we all did it. I picked up actually something very pragmatic from some of my summers. It's not the primary thing, but for us, it was our second summer when we were doing our volunteer experience. I went to Bolivia, and for the program that we went to, and there were several of us from our class who went down there, I did not have this level of Spanish that would have normally been required to go into this program. They had let me live with the in-country coordinator because my Spanish was not very good. He felt bad for me. He actually took me on some of the home visits to the other scholars so that I had someone that I could communicate with over those first couple of weeks. But my Spanish sort of really took off that summer. I chose the next summer to go to Madrid and work in a sort of more corporate center there. And how that's really impacted me to this day is a huge part of my clinical practice is with the Latinx Hispanic community, and I serve a lot of those families, and I speak to them in Spanish. I mean, I've done that throughout my entire medical career, really thanks to those summer experiences, because I don't think I would have ever had those immersion opportunities otherwise.
So I'll maybe add an example. Can you hear me? There we go. Testing. Maybe? There we go. Okay. So I'll add an example of learning something I didn't want to do from Morehead-Cain's summer experience. I spent a summer, it was actually a wonderful internship. I think one of the best ways to learn what you do want to do is to try stuff on, right? And sometimes you try something and you realize, oh yeah, I don't want to do this. And that's really helpful too, to learn what you don't want to do. So one of the summers I was a writer for a publication called The Washington File, which is a publication of the State Department, the US State Department. And I got to go to these amazing events, and I was at Camp David and covering really awesome stuff. I graduated in 2002, forgot to mention that earlier. So Clinton was president at the time, got to meet him that summer. There was a lot of really cool stuff going on. But one of the things I really learned from that summer was that I didn't want to be writing about the things that were happening. I wanted to be doing the things that got written about. And that was a pretty key takeaway for me from that summer.
Other questions? What would be y'all's biggest piece of advice for incoming
I would say take the opportunity to fail. Take the opportunity to explore. you have such an amazing bevy of opportunities in front of you, from the summer to things that you can do with your classmates here on campus. It is not just that moment is unique, that it's a safe place to push yourself and find out things about yourself you didn't already know, but it's a lifelong skill to have that type of confidence. And we were talking about the summer. I didn't answer that question, but that's really what I got out of the summers, is I realized where I could push, that I was going to be okay, that I could be dropped into a place that was very different or intimidating to me, and that things were going to be all right. One of my summers I was interning in a Hollywood office, and one of our clients was an actor, Tom Selleck, and I sent his script that he needed to read for the weekend to his wrong house. He was in wine country, and I sent it to the Palisades, which you may not know, but is very, very troubling for Tom Selleck. And so he called me up and screamed at me and yelled at me. I thought I was done. I've never had somebody this powerful treat me that way. And I showed up to work the next day, and Winifred, who was my boss at the time, he was like, "Oh, he yells at everybody. You'll be fine," And those types of things. So if I had to say anything, it would be take the time to push yourself, to learn what you're interested in, and to learn how to fail.
So I guess my piece of advice is something that I didn't actually, I kind of followed it, but I didn't follow it in some respects. So I think my bit of advice would be to take advantage of all the aspects of your experience at Carolina, including the Morehead, right? So background as to what I mean by that. So when I was at Carolina, honestly, I came, and my appreciation for the Morehead has actually expanded after I graduated, like after the opportunities that have happened after I graduated. So when I was, me and Chuck probably won't say this, but when I was a Morehead Scholar here, like I really only ever came to the Morehead like on check day. I was here, I pledged a fraternity, I was on the wrestling team, so I had kind of my whole crew, and two of the friends that Charlene is mentioning that she went on this trip with were guys who were all also on the wrestling team. So I feel like I kind of got my Morehead fill from just those two guys. So
They're like pretty big personalities, both
right.
of them.
So I had my fraternity friends, I had my wrestling team, and I kind of stopped by the Morehead to pick up my check. But I think that in retrospect, one of the things that I wish I had done a bit more of was, develop closer relationships with more of my Morehead class. I had those two guys who I have become they're actually still two of my best friends. And now after I've graduated, I see how they interact with like the other people in our class. And I wish I had done that as well, because as a result of those relationships, I'm now starting to develop some of those relationships, but I wish I had done it more when I was actually here. Because, these people are actually like some of the most spectacular people that you're gonna meet. And for me, it was like, I felt very fulfilled with my experience at Carolina, but if I could do it again, I wish I had taken a bit more advantage of the actual people who are Morehead Scholars.
For Amber, how did social justice work abroad, and what did you learn from that about doing social justice work here in the U.S.?
That's a great question. Thank you. So specifically, I was looking at our criminal justice system and how we treat children within our criminal justice system. And now it's kind of catching on that nonprofit organizations in the states that study the criminal justice system are saying, hey, there are better ways to do this. Look at the Netherlands, look at Europe. But I figured that out, back in 2010. So that's really what I learned. I learned that there was a more humane way to engage with children who make mistakes. And that I wasn't seeing that be applied to the children that I was working with in Durham. So I was a public policy major here, and I took a policy course when I came back from Scotland that kind of gave me the opportunity to draft what legislation would look like if I was mapping on what I had experienced in Scotland here. So there, for example, you're not given life without parole, right? Like a child isn't told you will die in prison. They actually have check-ins with the judge and the victim's family on their case to kind of assess how the child's rehabilitation is going. That was fascinating to me, the idea that prison is not just punitive, that it is meant to be rehabilitative, especially when applied to children in our community. So that's one thing that I learned. I also learned that, and this kind of goes to the Morehead Summers, what they taught me, like, don't limit yourself. You know, a lot of you are probably leaders within your schools or within your communities. The same characteristics and attributes you've had that have allowed you to be leaders in those environments, they are applicable internationally. And maybe you haven't had the opportunity to experience that until now, but the Morehead gives you that opportunity, and so I just say embrace it.
Yeah, I can start. As I mentioned, between undergrad and going to medical school, I worked at Planned Parenthood, actually in Chapel Hill and Durham for a year. And what I was really looking for was just a break from being a student. And as I mentioned, just being in the real world and having responsibilities. And I will tell you, I think I can speak really from a physician, perspective. But now I do a lot of mentoring and teaching. It's a huge difference to see the students that I work with who have had even just 1 year off, where they're doing some real work in the world, where they have a boss and consequences happen if they don't do their job appropriately, different than just getting a bad grade in school. And so for me, it really gave me some perspective and some time to think even about, before going into medical school, sort of what I really want to focus on there. And then, like I said, I think it just gives us real world perspective that's just invaluable before you go on into something, especially like medicine, which is a long, hard road. Yeah, so I knew I was pre-med coming in and stuck with it. I did, for our volunteer summer, I did do something very healthcare related, but for my entrepreneurship and my, I don't know, I'm probably getting all the names wrong because I know they've changed since we went through the independent study experience. I wasn't necessarily feeling like I had to do something that was healthcare related. The way I looked at it, and this was some of the guidance and advising that the Morehead-Cain program gave, is that I'd have my whole life to learn about medicine and healthcare, and that has been the case. And so when I was in Madrid, I was working in a language school, and it provided me an opportunity to work in a little bit more of a sort of entrepreneurship, sort of corporate environment. I was like working on my Spanish, which, as I mentioned, has become very valuable. So I would say, take those summer experiences to try these different things on for size. It gets harder and harder to do that as you move on in your career, to just like try something new, just to like see if you like it or not. These summers are great experiences to do that. The question was about we're all mentioned being change agents, and what UNC and the Morehead-Cain Scholarship did, and to help us do that, and what drives us to be change agents.
I can give that a go. It's a good question. Made me think for a minute. How UNC prepared me, I guess, for what I'm doing right now, is that it did teach me how to bring together different disciplines, right? How not to just do one thing, but how to cross-pollinate, take ideas from one discipline and use it in another discipline, how to balance those, how to bring those together to create value, which I think is, being a change agent. And so with my current role in the company I mentioned earlier, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm bringing together narrative storytelling along with consumer behavior research to change habits for the healthier. Using, that creative background mixed with the strategic business experience to actually provide a product that's compelling to individuals, but compels them to do something that's good for themselves.
One of the classes that comes to mind for me was this amazing honors class I had here on ethnography, and so people studying people, and it was a field working class. And like to this day, there are things that I learned in that class that I use, that I still use, and that have helped me to be a better listener and to have greater empathy for those that I interview or that I am, seeking to understand where someone else is coming from or trying to figure out what program we should strategically build to do good, and understanding, where the strengths, in my most recent example of Sephora, meet needs in the communities where we serve. And honestly, I can trace that back to a fantastic class I had here at Carolina and a professor who is still here and is chair of the American Studies Department here. So I think just the world-class education here at Carolina set me up incredibly well for the careers that I have gone on to have.
So I think, well, when you talk about change agent, one of the things that I think has been the most impactful for me is just the diversity of experiences that I got from coming to Carolina. See, as I mentioned, being from Jamaica, I came to the United States, but I had been up north, and I actually, quite frankly, I had always thought being from Jamaica, I had only heard about like certain schools. And so I had always thought I was gonna go to basically an Ivy League up up north, right? And the Morehead kind of exposed me to the South. It exposed me, the opportunities to travel internationally, which, I'm not sure I would have had, outside of, coming as a Morehead. And I think more importantly, like, as I mentioned, the guy, Josh, who is also my friend, the mix of people that you experience here is just so unique, right? Because I'm a Jamaican guy who is in New York, and now one of my best friends to this day, 20 years later, is a farm boy from Dunn, North Carolina. I'm dead serious. This is my guy, right? And I've talked about him. Like, I did a TEDx talk, and I talked about Josh because he has actually impacted my life, right? He's one of my friends that I met here, and the reality is that the exchange of ideas from my experience as a black man, immigrant in New York, being able to sit down with this Southern boy who will very readily admit that when he was growing up in Dunn, North Carolina, they had racist ideas, and being able to talk and interact and talk about those issues in a real way and not kind of cower and intellectually engage, like that to me it's completely opened my eyes. Then the other guy in our trio is kind of weird because the three of us were on the wrestling team, and we always used to joke about the fact that the three of us increased the GPA of the wrestling team by like a point. But it's an Indian guy named Thomas Tekakondom. So it's like me, Jamaican immigrant, this white guy from Dunn, North Carolina, and an Indian guy named Thomas Tekakondom, and we are all we're like the Three Stooges, and we are and not only from the Morehead, but one other guy who's in our quad is this Irish guy named John Paul Igo, who is not a Morehead, but just the ability to kind of interact with people who are very, very different, who we have learned, who are unique in their own special way, are bonded by the Morehead, being able to exchange those ideas is just, it's an experience that I don't think that I would have had the perspectives that I have in terms of the things I'm trying to do if I had not experienced that.
Okay, I have to add one colorful quote to that story since you actually now named all of them. So on this ski trip, the one memorable thing when we were reminiscing about what our first impressions were, Josh, the country white guy, said to Tommy, "Dude, you are the biggest Indian guy I have ever seen." And to this day, they are the best of friends and actually are in a company together.
Yeah.
Or not in a company, they started a company together.
Yeah, so that's actually like an amazing story because So this is the thing, right? And it actually goes to this whole Morehead and how it stresses you to like be yourself, but to expand, right? Your vision, right? So like I remember Josh, again, this one guy from Dunn, North Carolina, which for those that don't know is the dump truck body capital of the world. There are actually signs that say that. But so he goes to New York and we're still friends. And I remember he's starting this he's growing microgreens in his closet, and I'm like, dude, what the hell are you doing? Right? And he's telling me about this vertical farming and indoor farming and how this is the wave of the future. And I'm like, all right, whatever. It looks to me like a couple of stands with a couple of sprouts and some lights. And now he's actually grown that into like a really profitable company in New York that is selling salads to some of the top law firms. I actually helped him get into the law firm that I was in. Like it just teaches you to be yourself. So he actually comes to my law firm in overalls, like I'm Farmer Josh. I'm like, dude, stop it. Like you're overdoing this a little bit. But to the point of it's just such a unique mix of people, and it allows you to be yourself, but figure out ways to do whatever is whatever.
Well, I'm not sure if this directly answers your question, because the last summer convinced me to pack everything that I owned into a car and drive to LA for 5 years. So, but it did teach me, as I mentioned earlier, about follow what you're interested in. Really commit to it. It's going to be okay. You'll land the plane, but go for it. And I think looking back on it, what it really taught me was that I was interested in narrative storytelling. I was interested in empathy. I was interested in being able to communicate with someone in a way that they would respond not just logically, but emotionally, right? And I think that's really important for any entrepreneur to really understand, unless it's a really kind of hard science type thing you're doing. At the end of the day, you need to commit, or you need to connect to a consumer. And to do that, you can't just do it with your head. You have to do it with your heart. You have to do it with all the feels, And that's really just telling a story. And so I think that's what that last summer taught me.
What was your favorite and least favorite thing about being in Carolina?
The first basketball season I was here was my least favorite thing, I think.
I mean, to me, the favorite part was really the people. I mean, I think you've heard it from all of us. I mean, these are lifelong friends, not just your classmates in the Morehead-Cain Scholarship, though I was saying I was on the swim team, and so when I landed, sort of like Venroy, I sort of had a little bit of a set group of folks that, I was hanging out with in that side, but then also our Morehead-Cain Scholar, family sort of came together. So that was my favorite part. I don't have a least favorite yet.
I guess this will apply to some of you who are from North Carolina. I was worried that it would be like a lot of the same, right? I would see my same high school classmates, and I didn't know if I wanted to necessarily redo high school. And so what was my least favorite thing about the idea of being at Carolina, staying in North Carolina, being around folks that I'd grown up with really, was that quickly dissolved, and I found myself with like an expanded international, even friend group. So my fear didn't happen.
So carry on from what Hannah was saying, was there anything that scared you about Morehead-Cain
I mean, I had total imposter syndrome. I just didn't know if I was going to be good. I mean, you watch that video, and you're like, oh my God, is this am I going to achieve that? But I will also say, I mean, on the flip side, to riff off of what Jeff was saying, I mean, I think a lot of what the Morehead-Cain gave me was that confidence, because I'd always sort of thought, and I'm from Greenville, North Carolina. My parents are from the Philippines. And so, I just felt like, people who do big and important things are on this pedestal somewhere else. And, I didn't ever know that could be me. Then you like realize you're like, oh no, like all those people were sitting in this room just like you are now. You know, I think we're all doing great things. And then we look at our classmates and we learn from each other and get opportunities from each other. And so to me, that was a big part of it is, you know, just having that confidence and realizing you're like, no, I am good enough. Definitely.
So I don't know if it was scared me about being a Morehead, but I was definitely, when I first was coming here, I was definitely scared about coming south. And I remember because our freshman year, we had like summer reading, and the book was like Confederates in the Attic, and I was like, oh. And I was like, funny story because this is so there. I remember. So it was. So we read Confederates in the Attic, and I come to North. I'm from Jamaica, you know, and I've been in the North, like in Connecticut and New York, and then I come down here for actually it was for the Morehead this weekend, and somewhere or the other I end up one of my best friends in life is actually was my wrestling arch rival in high school, and he's a Morehead as well. He got the Morehead the year before me. And so when I came for my Morehead finals weekend, I think he like brought me to the club or something, which he probably should not have done. In retrospect, he's probably not that good of a friend. But I remember I was trying to get back. I was leaving and I was walking home, and I just remember it being really dark, and I was like really afraid because I was like, we just read this book, and then. So that was, I mean, I just think that, I was definitely, I was scared about just like the entire change. It was such a different experience than what I had envisioned my entire life, right? When I came to America, my parents were like, you're going to an Ivy League school. Like, that's just what the expectation was. And I came for my Morehead finalist weekend, and I basically went back and I was like, this is where I'm going. Right? Like, you can tell, like, and that was a difficult conversation to have, and particularly because it was like the whole idea of coming down south. Those were two things, but I just remember, you know, I just remember like meeting such amazing people when I was in your guys' position. I actually, on my Facebook status right now was me reflecting on the fact that about 20 years ago, I was in your position and how impactful the Morehead has actually been on my life. And one of my friends just posted on my status about, she's a Morehead as well, about how she remembers, and I didn't even remember this story, about when we were here, she came up to, she was nervous, and she came up to me, and I had some headphones on apparently, and she was like, what do you listen to? And I was like, Mozart or Beethoven. And these are like stories that are like just funny and interesting, but things that like you remember, and I still have that connection with her, and we're still cool to this day. But these are things that like, you know, it allowed me to get out of my comfort zone coming down south and just having the whole experience of being at Carolina.
My question is, how are you able to use the alumni network to kind of further explore your interests?
God, so much. I mean, when I was a scholar here, I do not come from a medical family, and I believe I went to Megan, if I remember correctly, and I said, I think I need to like shadow a doctor. And she found me someone to shadow. Now, actually, this doctor who's still in the area, and I share patients. But then on top of that, I mean, again, sort of these relationships that you build. So I'm moving into a new phase of my career where I'm sort of more in this like physician leadership executive role, and there are a lot of things that I don't know how to do. And one of my classmates, it was actually one of the ones that was on the ski trip with me, in the lift line, and while we were riding the chairlift up, I was like, okay, so Leah, this is like this basically new company I need to start. What would you do? Because she has spent her career as a consultant, as a leader in a startup in a healthcare company that's very successful out in San Francisco. And so I feel like these types of, I mean, she's someone who happens to be a best friend, but the sort of opportunities that you have to connect with people who have so many different skills, and like me as a physician, I'm often reaching out to the alumni who are not in medicine, because I want to get some of their knowledge and some of their advice as someone who's very different than me, and all you have to put in that entry line in your email is, I was a Morehead-Cain Scholar and I graduated in '04. I was wondering if you would be willing to have a 30-minute call with me, and the answer is almost always yes when you do that, these cold emails, but the Morehead-Cain in that first sentence makes it not a cold email.
So I'll say, David Greer actually he's out doing the development thing, which until now I didn't realize was code word for raising money. Thanks, David. But what, but one of the things that he always does, like he's visited me probably, once or twice a year, every year for like the past 2 or 3 years, and every time that we meet, we talk about, what am I trying to do, and who are people who are Moreheads who he can connect me with to help me to do the things that I'm trying to do. And so, as a law firm partner, I'm constantly kind of thinking about trying to build my book and try to find people who are going to be in the industries that I'm going to be that I'm interested in. And he's always trying to connect me with those people. And it's always, he sends an email, and it's such a nice, warm intro. It almost never fails. I always get positive response from the people who I actually end up reaching out to.
There are so many, but I guess mine was actually an ethnography class as well. There was a lot of gentrification happening in Chapel Hill when I was here, and it was kind of the hot button issue at the time. Specifically, there's this like really old black church on the outskirts of campus that was kind of being threatened of being demolished. Through this ethnography class, we made a point of attending that church. All of the students in the class every Sunday, building a relationship with the congregation, and we started taking the oral histories of the members of the congregation, so that their histories, the histories of that neighborhood and that community could be preserved. And I'm happy to say the church has been preserved. That oral history center is now run out of the upper floor of the church. And just the experience of kind of, like you were saying, integrating yourself into a community that's not your own, and kind of just being there to be of service, getting a grade for it and getting course credit for it, it was just really amazing. And I haven't had another educational opportunity quite like that.
I'll just add one little thing, which was the field work that we did was with tobacco farming families in North Carolina, and a lot of their way of life was being challenged at that time. Families were moving away, children were moving away from what their parents had done, and so it was just. I'm an out-of-state student. I went to high school in Miami, and so getting kind of that exposure to such an important piece of North Carolina culture was just really insightful and eye-opening to me.
I was taking 2 classes at the exact same time, so I'm going to cheat and have 2 of them. They were both screenwriting classes, and so one of them was taught by a woman named Joan Tewksbury, who wrote Nashville, and she really liked the first 15 pages of a script that I'd written, and really encouraged me to continue writing over the course of the semester. At the end of the semester, she shared it with her agent, and she shared it, a path for me to submit it to the Sundance Institute, things like that. It was the first time someone had really taken something I had written and patted me on the back for it in a meaningful way. Concurrently, I was taking a class called How to Pitch a Movie. And this was taught by a gentleman who'd written for years on Golden Girls, and he was a very hands-off teacher. We would, kind of talk about how we'd watch a part of the movie, he'd tell us how he would pitch it, and all of your grade came down to the very last day, where you had to pitch an idea for a movie. And so on this one hand, I had all these positive feelings that, oh wow, things are great, I'm like a great screenwriter, I'm all this kind of stuff. And then on the last day, I pitched my movie, and he told me it was the worst idea he'd ever heard. And he said I would fail you, but you've actually showed up for class every day, so I'm going to give you a D for this entire semester. It's the only time in my life I've ever gotten a D. And I think it taught me a lot that, look, you can't just show up and expect for everybody to like your ideas. And there's going to be half the room that likes your ideas and half the room that doesn't. And that's okay. And, get thick skin and go for what you believe in.
What was your experience navigating the intimate community of Morehead within a much larger population at Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's nice to show up on campus. And even though I was from North Carolina, I didn't have a huge network of, really close friends who also came to Carolina. And so it was nice to have sort of a group that you have the picnic when you first come, and so you're just sort of connecting with people. But I would say it's not that different than I think many students who come to Carolina who also, maybe you're on a sports team or join a fraternity or a sorority. And so I think it's like this extra special club that you also have access to that happens to give you a check and these really amazing experiences. So I would say like the way that I navigated my Morehead-Cain sort of group when I arrived, and the same thing I did on the swim team, were not overly different. It's just that you had this amazing, very diverse, group of people who were there and we're all looking to be friends, looking for new friends, because most people didn't come with their whole crew that they were going to hang with for all of college.
I wish I would have really appreciated the limited opportunities you have to try things on in life before you're kind of pushed out into the working world. And the reason why I say that is because there's just so many resources the Morehead offers, and so it's just the perfect opportunity to just try so many things. Especially when you're looking at grad school, I tell people all the time, with law school, you have 2 summers and then they push you out into a job. So 2 summers, figure it out. And so you really want to use, whether it's law school or med school or policy, like you want to use your summers as a Morehead to try out different things. Let's see what it's like to work for a small company. Let's see what it's like to work for a local government. Let's see what it's like to work abroad. You really want to kind of embrace and truly use like the plethora of opportunities. They also have funds that they allow scholars to use throughout the school year to meet alumni. I've met with several current scholars through those funds. I didn't use those funds when I was here. I was thinking, I'm doing my classes, I'm organizing, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I don't have time to go to DC and meet alumni, but I wish I'd really kind of used those resources while I had them.
So I'll say I wish I had used Chuck and Megan more when I was here. So I say this because I talk to like my friends now who were Moreheads, and they got so many additional opportunities because of the fact that Chuck would make a phone call and help them to get some connection to something or some organization. And for me, I really was not as engaged and didn't really appreciate how much the Morehead was trying to like actually help to advance you throughout the time that you were here and after. And I just know that having talked to other friends, their stories about how they utilized Chuck and Megan while they were here is so much more advanced than anything that I ever took advantage of.
So I wanted to ask, how did you come to the decision that UNC and Morehead Scholarship was the right decision for you?
It was a full ride to an awesome school. I don't know, I'm probably not the right person to answer. I mean, it just wasn't a hard decision. I was considering several other schools. The timing of our application was quite a bit earlier, but I pulled back. I happened to be a finalist for another scholarship at a school down the road, and I pulled out of that when I heard that I had been awarded this scholarship. I think it is just, in my opinion, the premier scholarship for an undergraduate education, and this is the best university to come to.
Yeah, it wasn't a hard decision for me at all. I had a lot of other applications on my desk that I was going to fill out, and I ended up throwing them away, not just because I'm lazy. I'm kind of lazy too, but it really was about a choice to bet on myself, right? There's all sorts of different schools and institutions you can go to, but the opportunity that you have here as a Morehead-Cain is unique. And you have the opportunity to bet on yourself every day here on campus, but every summer as well. And it's something that I wanted those opportunities. I wanted those extra swings of the bat. I wanted to be able to go travel the world, and I wanted someone else to pay for it. And that's what you have here. So.
So it actually was a hard hard decision for me. I kind of already alluded to it, but I was ready to get out of North Carolina and see something new. I was deciding between Harvard and here, and I think my decision really came down to what Chuck was talking about, brand versus opportunity. I somehow, within my finals weekend and just talking to scholars, realized, and visiting, like if you're having a hard time deciding between schools, visit and talk to people who go to those schools and see what the outcomes are. And that's what I did. And to this day, right, like whether I'm interviewing to work for a judge or, whether when it was time for me to apply to law school, the most impressive things I've done, I did as a Morehead. And those are the things I still talk about in my law school classrooms. My peers who came from, the Ivies, a lot of them had the same kind of background, the same experiences, the same consultant jobs, right, during the summer. And here I was, I'd worked in 3 different countries at that time. So really try to understand the brand versus opportunity point, and it is about taking a bet on yourself, right? Like you substantively are enough, right? Like a brand isn't gonna change that. So bet on the characteristics that you have and expand it with an opportunity like this. And that's how I made my decision.
No, I think, yeah.
What is a memory that you had that epitomized the Morehead-Cain experience?
I have so many amazing memories. It's really difficult to pick one, but the first one that comes to my mind was summer of 1999, kind of bouncing down a dirt road in rural Zimbabwe, where I had just finished an interview of a 12-year-old with 3 other Carolina students. We had fundraised money for a scholarship to send 12-year-olds to secondary school. And just the reality that kind of hit me of like, we are deciding the fate of these children's lives, and kind of what right have I to do that? And it's an education system started during British colonial rule, and like just all these questions and things. And I embarked on that summer all excited about, sending kids to school in Zimbabwe, and just the gravity of it and the opportunity of it. And kind of it set me on a path at that time towards kind of international education that I was studying and excited about, and kind of continues to be a passion of mine as well. So it was like this amazing, I had my 19th birthday in Zimbabwe, and that was a part of it.
So I think my experience that I had actually happened after I graduated, and it's actually one of the most significant moments of my life to this point. A couple of years ago, the Morehead has this the 7 series speaker thing that they have, which they basically invite alum back to kind of do these TEDx talk type things, and there's a programming. And a couple of years ago, they were selecting basically 2 representatives from each decade to represent the decade, and I was asked to do a 7 talk. And I really struggled about what I would talk about, because at that point I was boxing, and I think everybody wanted to kind of hear about me boxing and how about boxing and law, but I was really kind of conflicted, because during that time it was when there were all these issues of like black men who were being killed, and there was actually like the 100-man or the Million-Man March was happening in DC at the same weekend. And there were just all these issues that were really kind of coming to the front at that time. And I was really conflicted about what I was going to talk about. And, I actually wrote my speech like the day before I was coming to give my 7 talk. And I just remember like there were all these like super impressive people that were talking about all these different issues. And then it was my time to talk. And and I said in my 7 talk, and I actually still kind of feel this way in some respect. Like, I don't want to always talk about race, right? But my whole talk was about the fact that, you know, we have to share that responsibility to like address the social injustices that are happening in our world. It can't just be black people who are talking about this. And I remember at the end of my speech, I essentially said, look, the great thing about this is that I know that I'm in a room full of Morehead scholars, and so I know that you guys understand the burden that you have to kind of make sure that things are done like socially, that injustices are squashed out. And I remember when I got off the stage, there's just a rush of people, like all types of people, right? Older guys from North Carolina, younger people, like older black women, and they just kept coming to me and saying, one guy I'll never forget, he said, you know, you gave this old white guy something to really think about. And another guy came and told me about the fact that he is on a board and that he's going to start pushing to make sure that his boards are addressing these issues. And to me, that was just so instrumental because, first of all, is people who are in positions of power, and they're going to now address these issues about social injustice, which is exactly what we're trying to talk about here at the Morehead, right? And I did it as an alum, so it was like this great network of people who are all in positions of power, and it can just fan out, right? It's not like I'm just talking to my, you know, a couple of people who are going to be in the same neighborhood. These are change agents all across America, and the ability for me to be comfortable to talk about that in that room and know that it was actually going to bring about the impact that I was hoping it would, without it just being like, oh, this is just another black guy talking about race, like was really impactful and like very soothing to me.